You got the first name degree, but I don't know.
Genesis 5, we'll continue on looking at the extension of sin throughout the human race, particularly comparing the Canaanitic civilization to the Sethite civilization. As in all times, there are righteous and wicked living together. This has always been the sovereign plan of God since the curse. We have looked at Seth's parents, Seth's name, and Seth's importance. This brings us down to verse 6 in the 5th chapter, which lists for us the 10 generations, or the 9 generations including Seth, from him down to the flood. Let me just give you a few comments on the names. Not all of these I haven't come up with an actual meaning for all of these names. Enosh in chapter 5, verses 6 through 11. His name means mortal. Mortal. Comes from the verb onash, which means to be frail or feeble. Now, he wasn't actually literally a feeble person because he lived for 905 years. But it may have been an indication that Seth recognized that no matter how long a person lived, man is feeble in his fallen state. In verses 9 to 14, the second generation, Kenan, he is mentioned, I meant to say that Enosh is mentioned 7 times in the text. Kenan is mentioned 7 times in the text. His name, pardon?
Who was the second one you named was mentioned 7 times?
Kenan. Yes, I should mention that the Schofield edition that I have updates these names both in the Old Testament and the New Testament to make them the same. Right? The spelling's different in King James. But Kenan's name means fixed. Fixed.
So that I've heard before, right?
I don't know the significance of that. Mahalalel, the third generation, in verses 12 to 17, he's mentioned 7 times. Mahalalel.
How many times?
7.
Pretty straightforward. If you just put down these basic consonants in the word, the last one means God. And this verb, halal in the Hebrew, means to praise. And with the preposition, with the consonant name on the front, it makes it a participle. And so this means praising God or praise of God. That's what his name means. Praise of God. Enosh lived 905 years. And he died in the 1140th year after creation. You double check your charts. We'll come back to this anyway. According to my calculations, Enosh Well, we know that Adam lived to the 930th year after creation. Seth lived to the year 1042. Enosh lived to the year 1140. Kenan lived to the year 1235. Mahalalel lived to the year 1290. 1290.
1290. How do you get that?
Well, he lived 895 years, and he was born in the 395th year.
It's 1300. Wait a second, I'm from the street up.
395 plus 895.
So we started adding in the years.
10, 18, 19, 11, 12, 90. All right, Jared, verses 15 to 20. Pardon? Enosh to the year 1140. Oh, his name, Enosh? I haven't got there yet. Oh yeah, Enosh meant mortal, I'm sorry. Okay. Now, we're down to Jared, aren't we? The fourth generation. This is the fourth generation after Seth. He's mentioned in verses 15 to 20 7 times. His name means descent. Comes from the verb yarad, that means to go down or downwards, to descend. What this refers to, I don't know. He lived longer than his own father, so it doesn't, his shortness of life was directly tied to sinfulness, then it can't refer to his own moral descent, so it has to refer to something else.
He lived longer than his dad?
Jared lived 962 and his father only lived 895 years. Okay. Enoch, the son of Jared, who was the fifth generation from Seth. He's mentioned in verses 18 to 24 10 times. And his name means initiated.
These kids at birth, you almost pathetic something.
Yes, particularly we see this in Noah's case, that his own father named him Rest, because through prophetic revelation, he expected that his son would provide rest.
Enoch.
Enoch means initiated, from the verb to narrow, to initiate, to discipline. Enoch did not die. He lives forever. He was translated in his 365th year, which means that about 57 years after Adam died, Enoch went to heaven. So he was the first person to see Adam. Interesting. If Adam went to heaven.
Why do you say that?
If Adam went to heaven? Well,
Could you mention it someplace?
everything we know about Adam in the scriptures is that he's the man with the stigma. He's the one that doomed the human race. He's held to be the head,
But he wasn't cursed?
the fallen head. Pardon?
He was cursed.
Yeah, but he wasn't separated from God. Same teams.
No, not that he wasn't treated the same way. And in fact, that third chapter where it describes the fall, we've already noticed that God made coats of skins for them, like God sacrificed for Adam. So it probably he did go to heaven by the grace of God.
That's what he did.
Sure. But he's not held up as an example of faith anywhere in the Bible. Anything like that. It doesn't say he believed. He's omitted in Hebrews chapter 11 as an example of faith. Romans 5 describes him as the one that was responsible for bringing the curse. He stands in antithesis to Christ, who brings deliverance.
He is that, but is that more of a, this is how sin was initiated, stated, or this guy screwed up and it's all his fault and so on and so on?
Both. It refers to Adam's rebellion, his lawlessness, his misstep. Different words are used to describe it.
But he gives it a sin to the Jews.
Sure. Sin is sin. And all I'm saying is that my own personal view is that Adam's in heaven, right? And the only thing that would support that is the fact that God showered grace on him when he left him, took him out of the garden. And he made coats of skins for them. God shed a sacrifice for them, so I think they were covered. All right, so Enoch was translated, and he was the first person to go to heaven after Adam, for example. Let me record it. It doesn't tell us when Eve died. When did it count? They didn't. They do. They do, but they didn't. All right. Let's see. Methuselah, the sixth generation from Seth, is mentioned 7 times in verses 21 to 27. 7 times. And his name has a weird meaning. It means man of a dart. Man of a dart. I forget where I got these meanings. I think I got them on the Hebrew lexicon. It comes from 2 words. The one word that means a full-length man, not just male versus female, but a full-length man. And Shelach, or Shelach, which means missile or spear. The first dart player. No, I don't know the significance of that. I mean, it's total speculation. Methuselah lived the longest of all of the patriarchs. He lived until he was 969 years, which means that he was born in the 687th year after creation, and he died the year of the flood in 1656.
One way or another.
Well, I don't believe that he died in the flood, simply because the Bible describes that only 8 righteous people were saved in the flood. Well, surely the man was a righteous man.
Yeah, but it doesn't say that. It said 8 righteous were saved. It doesn't say that any unrighteous.
No, but God doesn't allow righteous people to be damned. So he must have died of natural causes prior to Um, his son was named Lamech. He's mentioned 7 times in verses 25 to 31. I don't know what his name means. And this brings us to Noah, the 8th generation from Shem. Lamech says he lived 777 years.
1651.
Right. So he died 4 or 5 years before the flood.
First thing they would say he had one son. Maybe he had sons and daughters. He must have been interesting.
They didn't let it alone, definitely.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to speculate, that surely there must have been family members from these, there must have been aunts and uncles. And,
Yeah, but a lot of the judges wouldn't know around preaching. Because, yeah, you both belong to believe in God. But don't need to think.
that's what I mean. There must have been a lot of family members that perished in the flood. Their extended family.
But it's good to do.
All right, Lamech. We got Noah. Noah is the 8th generation from Shem. He's mentioned in verses 29 to 32 in this chapter, and for the next 3 chapters, 6, 7, and 8. And 9.
Yeah.
And 10.
His name and address.
His name, Noach, in Hebrew means rest or quiet. It comes from the verb nuach, which means to rest, to settle down, to dwell, to give comfort.
How many times have you mentioned?
And he is mentioned 54 times in the book of Genesis. At least 54, probably more. I think I probably just counted up chapter 6, 7, and 8, and 9. The next generation appears to be to have been triplets. Shem, Ham, and Japheth in chapter 5, verse 32. And we don't have any information on their specific lifespan. So this is rather interesting, isn't it? That from the year of creation until the 2006th year after creation, which is the year that Noah died, tells us that Noah lived 950 years. And if he was born in 1056, then he died in 2006.
The stigma of the 120 years coming into effect certainly didn't affect them. Doesn't appear to have any effect.
Didn't affect him. It may have affected his sons.
Well, they were already 100 years old when the book came.
Oh, I see. Well,
You had to tell a 100-year-old man his son to start building a boat. What's that, Dad?
that's like telling somebody to go build a spaceship in Galactica,
You did.
All right, so I think it's rather interesting that we are given in this 5th chapter of Genesis a summary of the first 2,000 years of human history in rather some detail as far as chronology goes. The first 9 generations from Adam down to Lamech could easily have known they could easily all have known one another. Lamech was born in 876. Well, that means that he lived for about 60 years. There's a 60-year overlap there, approximately, between Adam's last days and Lamech's first days.
One says there could have been several billion people alive.
Certainly. 2,000 years. Well, all we're told is in most cases that they had sons and daughters, and the only ones that are mentioned are the firstborn, right? So that's traditionally the way it would be. Let's say that Adam had, we know that Adam had Cain and Seth, and it says he had daughters, so he had at least two, right? Daughter and daughter. So there's at least four. Okay, now they all marry. Okay, well let's just say that Cain and Seth married the other two daughters. Okay, so therefore you have two families to start out with. Okay. Right? So Cain had that many generations, and they just start branching off. And it takes most of these guys didn't have children until they were 60 years old. Some of them.
But they could have had daughters.
Certainly. Certainly. So within 1,000 years of creation, you could conceivably see a dozen or more generations all propagating. It doesn't take long.
7 billion is a lot.
Did you say 7?
Billion.
I think you said several.
So, you said a small 7 billion.
You said 7? Yeah, that's a lot. You have to remember that nobody died, basically. Everybody that was born just stayed alive for a lot longer than that.
All I know is that 7 billion is a big number.
Yeah. It shows that body deteriorated.
What is it they say now, that half the people that ever lived are still alive? That's not Christian, but they...
There's this woman that I'm saying the first half of life. No, listen, John. There's 4 billion and 2 billion first half.
Now, just a couple of comments about these. I think maybe we should read through this chapter, and then we'll just leave it. But I'll make the comments as we read them. Starting with verse 3, Adam lived 130 years and begot a son in his own likeness after his image, and called his name Shem. So Shem is the second generation. In the days of Adam, after he had begotten Shem for 800 years, he begot 7 daughters. Apparently more sons than daughters. So, and all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. Now that, by the way, is the first natural death recorded in the Scriptures. It should remind us of God's promise in Genesis chapter 2, verse 17, that in the day that thou eatest thereof thou shalt surely die. That means that the day that Adam sinned, he became mortal, that is subject to death, good as dead. You might as well say that he died. Okay. Now, it took his body, several hundreds of years to actually go down to the point of literal death. But he was spiritually dead and um, morally dead and physically dying, subject to death, from that point on in his life. Very significant statement. In fact, I have heard somebody say that the key word to Genesis chapter 5 is the word died. You'll circle up the number of times there that it's 5:5, 5:8, 5:11, 5:14, 5:17, and 20, and 24. Well, 24 just says that he was not. 27, 31. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 references to that word.
That one death.
Right. This 5th chapter shows us that even good people are subject to the curse. You know, Romans chapter 5, verse is it 13 or 14? It says that death reigned from Adam to Moses. Romans chapter 5, verses 13 to 14. Verse 12 says, "Wherefore, as by one man sin entered into the world, and so death has passed upon all men, for that all have sinned."
Death reigned from.
And death reigned from Adam to Moses. Romans 5:13. Well, here we have it. We have the reign of death. These 3 chapters then, chapters 3 to 5 in the book of Genesis. Genesis 3 shows us the first sin and the immediate consequences. Chapter 4 shows us the sinful line and the extenuating consequences. Sin begets sin, and more sin. Genesis chapter 5 shows us the godly line and shows us that even the godly die. They also are subject to the curse. Right? That is the significant relationship of these 3 chapters. They too are subject to the curse. So those 3 chapters are intimately related, aren't they?
You get both there after godly line.
Also subject to the curse. Right? Now we already discussed this, but you should write it down in your notes. That in spite of the fact that the godly line was subject to the curse, it was through this line in Genesis 5 that Christ came eventually. And all you have to do is go back to Luke chapter 3 to see that in the genealogy. Specific reference is Luke chapter 3, verses 23 to 38. 23 to 38. It mentions Shem, from Noah, from Lamech, from Methuselah, from Enoch, from Jared to Mahalalel, Canaan, Enosh, Seth, and Adam. Precisely the same people mentioned in Genesis chapter 5. Okay? Let me just double check something here. I didn't write this down, but I think 2 Chronicles gives us another genealogical summary. I think it's 1 Chronicles. Adam, Seth, Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, Noah, Shem, Ham, Japheth. Right? So, 1 Chronicles chapter 1, verses 1 to 4 would be another cross-reference. So Seth lived 105 years. That means that in the year 235, Enosh was born. And Seth lived after he begot Enosh 807 years and begot sons and daughters. And all the days of Seth were 912 years. That means he died in 1042. And Enosh lived 90 years and begot Kenan. That is in the year 325. Alright? In the year 325, Kenan was born. Enosh lived 815 years, begat more children, and he died when he was 905. That means in the year 1140. So, 70 years after he was born, Kenan begat Mahalalel. That means that Mahalalel was born in 395. And he too, in the next 800 and some years, begot sons and daughters, and he died when he was 910. That is in the year 1235. Pardon? That's Kenan died in 1235.
Certainly a long way compared to what
It's confusing when you're listening to somebody else's numbers. The best way is to figure it out yourself. I'm just giving it to you just so you can double check your work. Verse 15, Mahalalel lived 65 years and begot Jared. That means that Jared was born in the year 460. Alright? And then he lived another 830 years, begat more children. Verse 17, and all the days of Mahalalel were 895, and he died. So that means he died in 1290.
Well, they considered them teenagers longer at that time.
Oh man, imagine a person's adolescence lasting for a century.
Looks like this guy had started earlier, started still having kids.
So Jared, verse 18, lived 162 years, and he begot Enoch. So Enoch was born in the 622nd year after creation. Mm-hmm. 622 AC. Alright?
Yeah.
So then Jared lived another 800 years, and he got more children, and he died when he was 962. Well, this means in the year 1422. So Enoch was 65 when he begot Methuselah. So that means that Methuselah was born in the year 687. Enoch walked with God after he begot Methuselah 300 years and begat more children. And all the days of Enoch were 365 years. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. So if he was translated in his 365th year, that means in 987. So Noah couldn't have known Enoch, although his son and his grandson obviously did. While we're on Enoch, Hebrews chapter 11 verse 6 says that without faith it's impossible to please God. He that comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. Verses 5 and 6 refer to Enoch as a hero of faith. He was not because God took him. And Enoch is a good example of the fact that you don't have to let your name hold you back, because he had a cousin that was a rotten person. A very removed cousin. Remember? Cain had a descendant called Enoch.
Yeah.
And Seth had a descendant called Enoch. Well, you go back, this is a very removed cousin, but there were other people with the same name, and your name means nothing when it comes to your own ability to make a choice as to what you're going to do with your life. And Enoch made the right choice. He's also, in the scriptures, held as a type of the church, because he was translated before he saw death. The first type of the church, one of the first types. I suppose the New Testament reference would be 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 14 through chapter 5, verses 8 and 9, where the Apostle Paul is comforting the Christians, saying that that Christ is going to return and catch them up to be with himself. And then in chapter 5, he describes the conflagration on the earth when Christ actually returns to the earth. And he says, when people are going to say, when they say peace and safety, terrible judgment is going to come upon them. But we, brethren, are not of that. We walk in the light, not in the darkness, as they are. And God has not appointed us to this wrath. However, he says, be diligent. The reference to that? That's chapter 5, 1 Thessalonians 5. So, the book of 1 Thessalonians is crucial to establish, at the very least, pre- and mid-trib rapture. Are you all aware of the mid-trib view? The mid-tribulation rapture view is that in the 70th week of Daniel, you have 70 years, which is 7 years long. That's the future tribulation period. And the great tribulation, the period of wrath, is in the last 3.5 years. So the mid-trib view teaches that the church will be raptured prior to this great tribulation. Right? That in the first 3.5 years, the Antichrist is revealed, and Christians will be able to identify him, and the great falling away takes place. And it's only after those things that Christ will capture the church.
What's the basis for that?
2 Thessalonians 2. That there's a difference in the manuscripts there. The Protestant manuscripts, according to the KJVers, teach the day of Christ precedes that the day of Christ will not come. That is, the rapture won't come until the falling away and the manifestation of the man of sin. The pre-tribbers use a different manuscript from 2 Thessalonians 2, which describes it as the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord won't come. That is, this judgment, the day of the Lord will not come until the falling of sin. The falling away takes place, the revelation, of the man of sin. So, and he who hinders is taken out of the way first.
Because the Holy Spirit is taken away from us.
That's the way they interpret it. The mid-tribbers refer to the hinderer as Satan, not the Holy Spirit. Anyway, it's kind of complex, but 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and 5 are really important, and they show us the parallel to Enoch's experience. Methuselah lived 187 years and begat Lamech. That is, Lamech was born in the year 874. And he lived 777 years and begot more sons and daughters before he died.
He died in
1651. $874 and 777.
Yeah, I was with him 3 years.
1651. Okay? No. So he must have heard about Noah. I mean, his own son was Noah. He must have heard him preach and stuff like that,
His son was knowing, I heard about him.
Okay? Now, when he was 182, he had a son named Noah, and he said, "This same shall comfort us concerning our work and toil of our hands." Isn't that an interesting commentary on the curse? See, Lamech lived in the first millennium after the curse. 1,000 years later, the ground is still cursed, and they're working and toiling and so forth. So, this brings us to the conclusion of our second major section in the book, and next class we're going to pick up with the third major event in primeval history, which is the flood.
Now, what part are we going to cover in this set of exams? Up to or including the flood?
See what's the... No, we don't have this anymore before the text. What is this?
Not to give, that's the first conclusion. See if they know.